Eliza's return was a hard sock in the gut. She just strolled across the lawn one morning, shoulders hunched, like she was arriving home from a long day of school. Her blonde hair was badly knotted with twigs and dirt, and she wore the same unicorn pajamas she had on the night she disappeared. I rubbed my eyes once, twice. Nope, still there. This was real. Across the street, Mr. Richards emerged to fetch his paper, spotted Eliza, and then dropped his coffee mug. An approaching group of power walkers froze mid-step to gawk. I swallowed the lump in my throat, scooped up my daughter into my arms, and quickly carried her inside. My wife was halfway down the stairs, fresh from the shower, still drying her hair. When she spotted Eliza, her face drained of color. I watched the realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Then she screamed. 15 minutes later, I was peeking through the curtains at news reporters and burly men holding boom mics. Police struggled to establish a perimeter, and I knew that sooner or later people would want answers. Turns out 6 months is the perfect amount of time to pique people's interest. If a missing child turns up 3 days later, that's just a dumb kid who ran away. If they reappear after 20 years, they aren't cute anymore. They're just dysfunctional adults grappling with an abusive past. But 6 months? That's the sweet spot. It gives the armchair detectives enough time to circulate their crackpot theories online, but soon enough that the smiling photos are still fresh in everyone's memory. My wife, having barricaded herself in the bedroom, spoke to me through the closed door. "I'm not going out there, not with that thing. That thing is your daughter." "No, it isn't," she snapped, angry and unstable. "I know my daughter, and that's not her. It'll look suspicious." "I don't give a shit." She slammed the wall between every word. Downstairs, Eliza sat at the breakfast bar. I watched her as I would a vicious dog, wary of getting too close, but, in the end, had no choice but to play the part. As the garage door tilted up, press warned my coupe, blinded me with camera flashes. Then news vans chased us through the neighborhoods and narrow streets. In the rearview mirror, Eliza sat quietly, zero emotion in her eyes. At the hospital, a doctor gave her a clean bill of health. She's got a few bumps and bruises, and it looks like she's been out in the cold for a while, but otherwise she's okay. After that, 2 detectives brought in a child psychologist. She asked Eliza questions like, "What happened the night you went missing? Do you remember where you were? Can you describe the people who took you?" But she didn't respond to any of them. The psychologist handed her a stuffed unicorn and took me out into the hall. Was she always this quiet? No, before she was a bit of a chatterbox, actually. She explained Eliza was likely suffering from a condition known as mutism. She'll talk when she's ready. "Where's her mother?" one of the detectives asked. "Shouldn't she be here?" His tone made the question more of an accusation. I cringed inside, fighting the urge to blurt out the truth, to throw my wife to the wolves. The shock was too much for her, I finally said. Returning home, police struggled to contain the tsunami of paparazzi. It took 20 minutes to inch the car into the garage. Inside, I set Eliza down at the kitchen table and gave her a pack of crayons. Then I went upstairs and knocked on the bedroom door. "Honey, it's me. Just me." She was still in her bathrobe, chewing a fingernail, her eyes puffed up and red. There was a half-empty bottle of wine on the bedside cabinet. "The doctor says Eliza's completely fine, no injuries or signs of abuse." She sparked a cigarette and refused to look me in the eye. "The detectives asked about you. They were curious why you didn't come to the hospital." After receiving no response, I said, "Look, I know this is fucked, but people are going to scrutinize our every move. We've got to be smart. Remember those lunatics on the message boards insisting you did it? Eliza's downstairs right now. That thing isn't Eliza. How can you say that? Because it's true, she snapped. Eliza's dead. That's just her skin and bones. Something deep inside my stomach twisted. Before I could think of a response, a knock came to the door. My wife retreated into the joined bathroom. Eliza stood in the hall, stuffed penguin in one hand, drawings in the other, which she offered up like a Father's Day gift. Did you do these? I asked. She nodded. The first was of a smiling family, all three of us standing together. The second was my wife crying over a sideways Eliza with X's for eyes. Next was Eliza wrapped in her bedsheets deep in the forest. And then finally there was one of her surrounded by black swirls and squigglies. These are, I gulped, tasting bile in the back of my throat. Wonderful. Eliza threw a cold, unforgiving look towards the door her mother had hid behind. Then she bolted towards her bedroom, stopping to glance back. And for a moment, in the dim of the hall, her unblinking eyes seemed to flash silver. My heart did somersaults in my chest. When I showed the drawings up to my wife, she squeezed her eyelids together and pressed the wine bottle against her lips. After she finished, I took a long swig myself. And then I did something I hadn't done since the night Eliza vanished. I prayed. I prayed, perhaps selfishly, that my compliance with my wife's sins hadn't caught up with me, the way I'd always believed it would. I really wish my daughter stayed lost. The night Eliza found her way home, my wife passed out drunk in the tub, the bathroom door locked from the inside. She wasn't taking any chances. I peeked in on Eliza every few hours. Questions clawed their way to the front of my mind. Where had she been? How did she come back? And why now, after all this time? Since returning, my daughter hadn't said a single word, nor had she smiled, giggled, or displayed any kind of human emotion. She just ate, played, and slept. The psychiatrist said that this was a common response to trauma, and insisted Eliza would soon become more herself in time. She just needed love and support. Unfortunately, her mother wasn't prepared to offer either of those. As the days passed, the neighborhood became infested with more and more reporters and photographers, each desperate to break the story. I'm leaving, my wife said one night. The second those parasites lose interest, I'm gone. You can't leave. What are people going to say? Not my problem. It is your problem, I replied more angrily than intended. You're responsible for this mess, or did you forget? Complete silence. From her pained expression, it was clear I'd crossed the line. I felt a mixture of relief and horror around Eliza. Part of me believed it was her. I'd recognize her button nose and reddish cheeks anywhere. But then she'd throw a peculiar glance, which would twist my gut. The lawyer told us we had to make a statement. Even though Eliza was alive, there were people online who refused to let go of their crackpot theories, not to mention the detective who kept skulking around. We'll dress up the lounge, the lawyer said. Show the three of you on the couch one big happy family. We'll ask the public to respect your privacy. Once the story is out there, the reporters will lose interest. We agreed to go along with the charade. Channel 6 sent out a dark-haired lady I recognized from the evening news to conduct the interview. Mercifully, she lobbed us nothing but softballs. She eventually turned to my wife. You've been awfully quiet. Is everything okay? My wife looked at me, looked at the cameras, and the eager-eyed producers standing behind them. I'm still in shock is all. With that, the attention tapered off. Then my wife geared up to leave. They'll know you did it, I said. I don't give a shit, she replied, stuffing shirts into a suitcase opened across the bed. Where are you gonna go? Anywhere but here. What about Eliza? You're just abandoning her? That thing isn't Eliza. How many times do I have to fucking tell you? Of course it's Eliza. Then how come she's alive? I clenched my jaw and rushed to the window to check that there was no police outside. Keep your voice down. I'm going. You can't stop me. Did you forget half the internet thought you were a murderer 2 weeks ago? I don't care, she said flatly, hoisting a suitcase off the bed with a grunt. I blocked the door. I can't believe I'm hearing this. Our daughter's alive. This is what we wanted. A chance for things to go back to normal. It's a miracle. Move. It's her. Her expression darkened. Do you really believe that? Look me in the eye and say that's Eliza. Unable to meet her gaze, I sighed, then stepped out of her way. My wife wheeled her suitcase along the hall and down the stairs, with me following a few steps behind. Please, just sleep on it at least. Look, if you want to stay here with that thing and get stabbed or eaten or wherever the fuck's going to happen, be my guest. But She jumped back, surprised by Eliza, who was standing at the front door. I said, "Hey, sweetie, did we wake you?" She stared at her trembling mother. I took Eliza's hand and said, "Come on, sweetheart, it's late. Let's get you back to bed." Halfway towards the stairs, Eliza stopped to tug her mom's sleeve. Slowly, nervously, my wife hunched over, and to her left ear hovered close to Eliza's mouth. Then Eliza stood up on her tiptoes to share a secret. "What did she say?" I asked. Rather than answer, my wife just stormed out of the house, the color gone from her face. "Eliza, honey, what did you say?" Eliza didn't respond. I carried her into her bed and pulled the sheets up to her neck, wondering how much she actually understood. I pictured her buried 6 feet underground, the dark, moist earth in her hair, worms boring into her ears and eyes. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so... I couldn't get the words out. The shame was a pair of invisible hands wrapped around my windpipe. Eliza's fingers laced themselves with mine. It was a simple gesture, but one which eased the tremendous guilt. I felt her pulse between my fingers and, at that moment, knew it was my daughter. The fear dissolved. A few days later, 2 detectives arrived at the door. It was my wife. They'd found her Subaru at the bottom of the lake. She'd driven straight off a bridge. That sure gave the conspiracy theorists something to sink their teeth into. I could tell from the detective's question he had a good idea of what really happened the night Eliza vanished. Although he couldn't put all the pieces together, since she turned up alive. In the end, the lawyer assured me things would turn out fine. That night, I wallowed in bed until the door swung open. Eliza was holding some new pictures she'd drawn. I sat up and waved her over. She slid next to me, resting her head on my chest while I flicked through the pages. The first was of her and me holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Second was my wife, driving a crudely drawn car off a bridge. And finally, there was one of her crying, surrounded by black swirls and squigglies. "These are wonderful," I said. As the sound of an engine traveled along outside, a set of headlights threw light across the room. Eliza's green eyes flashed silver. Her skin turned fish-bone white. Her hair became black and glossy, and her mouth was suddenly crammed with serrated fangs, jutting out at awkward angles. The light vanished, and then Eliza became my perfect little princess again. I lay down, numb with grief. My wife was gone. Things would have been different if I hadn't gone along with her sick plan, if I had refused to hide her mistake. But I'd already lost Eliza. Accident or not, if they discovered what my wife did, they'd have jailed her for murder, and then I'd be alone, completely and utterly alone. Over the past 6 months, There's been times I despised her for dragging me into this mess. Times I wished it had been her instead. And now, my wish had been granted. There was no sense living in the past. I reached out and stroked the back of Eliza's skull, running my fingers through her thick, golden curls. I'm glad my daughter came home.